Welcome to episode 108 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. Joined as always my co-host, Mary, a woman who thought the Battle of Spotsylvania was about a dog. I am merely a shot down stump named Darren. Howdy, Mary. How we doing? How we
You're
doing?
talking about the dog with Spotsylvania.
Well, we had a fun talk about that not too long ago. So
God.
what's going on with you? How are things?
Good. How are you?
Oh, fabulous. We just completed a fantastic monthly roundtable with a lot
I
of friends
did.
of ours who were on. So that was good. So if you haven't been on the roundtable, jump on. We get to talk a lot of Civil War nerdery, which is pretty cool. And and we get to do some fun stuff tonight. We get to finish up part 2 of our episode on Spotsylvania. But since
Yep.
I'm a gracious host as always, and I never forget, I'm going to ask you right now, what are you drinking on this fine evening?
I am drinking, I think it's called Lord Juice by Lord Hobo Brewery, which is local to us here in Massachusetts. And I am drinking it out of my Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park mug. How about you? Because I'm nice. And
Oh, thanks for asking, Mary. I never thought you'd ask as usual. I'm drinking, it's called 617 from Lord Hobo. 617, of course, is the area code for Boston. Of course, big night in Boston sports, Mary. We got the Celtics going tonight. And then I'm drinking it out of my U.S. Grant mug because Grant is, well, he'll be talked about tonight as quite a bit as we talk about this part 2 of the Battle of Spotsylvania. Again, before we kind of get into what we dropped off, we got to turn back time a little bit and
Yeah.
talk about where we were. So we're back to finish up part 2 of this. And basically, when we left the boys in Spotsylvania, it was a very dire situation for Robert E. Lee and his army of Northern Virginia. So by mid-morning on Thursday, May 12th of 1864, this massive assault by U.S. Grant on that Confederate Mule Shoe salient was in its full fury. Now, 19,000 men under Winfield Scott Hancock, his Second Corps. He'll let his division commander, Francis Barlow, he hit that center. He broke right through on that eastern slope of that Mule Shoe salient. Mary, if you've forgotten the whole episode, you can go back and listen to it if you've forgotten by now. But Barlow's men, they had routed some of the best soldiers in the Army of Northern Virginia. I mean, we're talking about the Louisiana Tigers. We're talking about the famous Stonewall Brigade.
Yeah.
They were completely removed from the battlefield as part of this Union assault. Not only was the Confederate line breached, but the soldiers were completely surrounded in the woods all around them. There would talk about musket fire lighting up the woods all around them. They had nowhere to go. The wounded couldn't go behind because they couldn't. They had nowhere to go.
One soldier mentioned that the bayonet was freely used on both sides. The enemy fought desperately, and nothing but the formation of our attack and desperate valor of our troops could have carried the point. So it's very horrific fighting here at the Mule Shoe.
It is, and this is all in a misty rain. It's been raining for a couple of days. It's muddy, it's sloppy. 1,000 men stomping through. You can only imagine. The eastern middle of the rebel line was gone. So a soldier from the Stonewall Brigade, he talked about it. He goes, the keystone in our entire arch has been taken away. So you can imagine those blue uniforms are flowing through the breach like water through a dam at this point.
Yeah.
A Union soldier there, he said after the battle about it, he goes, he thought this was the last day of the rebellion. He saw this was it. He thought he saw the end. And while this was all happening, Robert E. Lee, he's back at his camp in a place called the Harrison House, and he's completely oblivious to this catastrophe that's going on just a little bit north of him. Lee is going to begin to figure it out slowly but surely at what's going on. He's going to notice stragglers, people retreating to the back of Allegheny Johnson's division, of Ewell's Corps, and they're running for their lives. And Johnson, himself, Allegheny Johnson, will be one of 4,000 casualties being captured.
Yeah, him, Marilyn Stewart.
A lot of them, they were all getting bagged. But when these retreating rebel soldiers are running past him, Lee, he has no idea what's going on. He's going to sit there in his horse. He's going to remove his hat so people can know it's him, apparently. And he's going to basically yell to these men, hold on. We're going to go form a new line. Your comrades need your services. Stop. Well, most of these men ignored him. They were running like they were chasing an ice cream truck. They were gone.
Well, I think it's in a way, it's kind of like what happened at Chickamauga with the breakthrough, right? Like they're like, we're getting the hell out of here.
It's every man for himself.
Yeah.
Lee's going to yell, shame on you, go back to your regiments. But again, he's not sure what's going on. It wasn't until a staff officer named Robert Hunter, who had jumped on an artillery horse to escape, he was part of Allegheny Johnson's staff, is going to ride to the back and he's going to try to get away himself. Hunter is going to see Lee and he's going to ride up to him and he's going to say, General, a line is broken at the angle in General Johnson's front. And right at that moment, I mean, Lee reportedly had been in a great mood. He was under the impression that Grant was retreating. He thought they were getting ready to do a big counterassault. They were going to bag him. And there's a story the night before, he's back at the Harrison house having a jovial time, joking around with his staff. He's in a great mood. But when he gets this news from Hunter, everything changes. His heart sank. I mean, it was like you grab that IPA in the fridge, but it turns out it's a seltzer water. That look of just heart
Or it's a
dropping.
really bad IPA.
Oh yeah, but he for the most part everything did a complete 180. And for Lee, this was the most existential, serious threat he'd had. This was it. And he went from thinking they were going to chase Grant down to the end of his army, the end of the war in Virginia, the end of the war probably in the East. And this is not a hyperbole. This is literally how close it was.
Yeah.
This is how close Grant came to finishing off Lee on May 12th, 1864 at Spotsylvania for good. It was right here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly is one of those moments where it's like, well, and then it's like, if certain things had been a certain way, could they have done it? But I think the one thing, and we'll probably talk about this later on in the episode, is just the weather is against them at this point too. Like, it's the weather terrible.
The weather's been an issue the whole time.
Yeah.
Now just picture Lee at this moment. He's like, what the hell? Because he knows whatever he's going to do in the next hour is probably going to be literally life and death for his men and his army. Now, Lee did know he had one more division in reserve in the back. This was a division of Jubal Early.
Mm-hmm.
Now, since A.P. Hill was sick, as usual, he wasn't there. Early's going to take command of that Third Corps, which is going to promote a Georgian named John Brown Gordon up to take over. Okay, so he is going to be in charge at this moment. Gordon, we'll talk about him in detail in one of these episodes, but for now, in a nutshell, he's a slave-owning attorney who, despite having no military background, rises. He becomes a captain of those Raccoon Roughs of the 6th Alabama. Eventually, he'll take over the regiment. He'll fight at Seven Pines, and he's basically bulletproof. He's made of Teflon because he's
he kind of cashes in his karma at Antietam. I mean, when he gets those wounds.
He's riding up to the front with the 6th Alabama at Seven Pines. Right in front, doesn't get a scratch on him.
Yeah.
But he gets hit a lot at Antietam, shot in the face. He's going to be out. But he is going to return, and he's going to ultimately end up being a rising star in Lee's army.
He's kind of like, in a way, think of what Claiborne is in the Western theater. This is like John Brown Gordon is like that too. The way he kind of rises up through the ranks and just becomes this, like, he's just good and he keeps getting better.
Yes, and so Lee and Hunter are going to go ride to go find Gordon and to let him know what's going on, because he's assuming, like Lee, that he has no idea what's going on up at the Mule Shoe. But Gordon, though, did have an idea what was going on. He didn't know for sure, but before Lee and Hunter arrived, Gordon did hear reports from stragglers that something was afoot at the Circle K. But he didn't know how serious it was. He basically was like, well, there's something going on. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I got to prepare for it.
He said he couldn't see, he could hear stuff, but he couldn't through the mist and stuff when he woke up in the morning, like when he started getting reports. Like, he knew something was going on, but he said, like, the way the weather was, like, he couldn't see through the mist. He couldn't tell exactly what was going on. Right.
Weather was a big equalizer with this. Now, Gordon has 3 brigades, but only one is going to be with him. And this is going to be the brigade of North Carolinians under Robert D. Johnston. R.D. Johnston, if you're nasty, right? R.D. Johnston. Now, Johnston, it's funny, Johnston's military, I don't know if anybody studies R.D. Johnston, but his military career isn't all that great. It's kind of whatever. But he's probably best known for being the father of Gordon Johnston. And if you study the early 20th century, Gordon got the Medal of Honor in the Philippine-American War.
Oh, okay.
He was also the football coach of the University of North Carolina in 1896. I mean, so that doesn't get, except for me, nobody really cares, but
Yeah.
it's just one of those things. But Gordon's two other brigades were his old brigade that was now commanded by a guy named Clement Evans. This is a Pegram's brigade. Pegram had been injured a week earlier in the wilderness, and then Pegram's that brigade is being commanded by John Hoffman, and they're both in the back, sensing something was wrong. Gordon, like to your point, he says something's up with the weather. He's hearing stuff. He's going to place R.D. Johnson's brigade in line. This is the 5th to 12th to 20th and the 23rd North Carolina. And like the Union men a few hours earlier, to your point, he's going to use this weather to his advantage now. He knows he doesn't have enough men to create anything more than a strong skirmish line.
Yeah.
But he knows that the Union men probably can't see them, but they can probably hear them. And they're going to make the numbers look a lot bigger than they really are because it is hidden by that fog.
Yeah, the fog really is hiding like what is there and all that. And they really don't know. Like at this point, what do we do kind of thing, right?
Well, they knew they couldn't last long. They knew at some point they were going to get discovered. But he hoped at worst that Johnson's North Carolinians would at least buy him some time for Hoffman and Evans to get up, which is kind of what happens. Johnston's men do line up and they begin to move in that line towards the woods, heading towards the eastern slope of that Mule Shoe to help slow that Union roll as they begin to come through the woods, heading towards that McCool house. So they're kind of working their way through now. R.D. Johnson's going to get shot in the head. He's going to survive, but he's going to get wounded when this whole thing goes. It was right about this moment, as the Carolinians are moving through the woods, that Lee and Hunter are going to show up at Gordon's headquarters.
Yeah. He just appears on Traveler. You know.
Well, he's going to explain to Lee that he anticipated what's going on. He got his men going, and Lee was obviously very happy to hear this. Not long after, Hoffman and Evans do arrive. So now they're getting reinforcements moving up towards the line.
Yeah.
The commander of the 49th North Carolina, he was in Pegram's brigade, was called Extra Billy Smith's brigade, because he commanded at one point.
The names in the Civil War, Extra Billy Smith.
Oh yeah, but there was a guy named Colonel John Catlett Gibson, and he saw that. And this was a lot of cool stories about this part of the battle. He's going to see Lee riding towards him, and Gibson is going to salute him, and Lee's going to ignore him and ride right by. He's going to ghost him. I know the feeling. He's going to ride right by him, and at this point, Lee is heading up to the gap between where Hoffman's Virginians and where Evans's Georgians are heading towards the front now. So he's kind of going right through the middle. And just imagine the scene. Bullets are zipping by. And there's that story where Gordon is going to notice a staff officer named Thomas Jones. He's going to be riding on his horse. And he's going to be leaning forward, hugging the horse's neck and crouching down. Now, Gordon, whenever he rode into battle, he rode high on the horse like Fabio in the cover of a Danielle Steele novel. He always looked like that. His hair blowing in the wind. But he always
that needs to be a meme, by the way.
But he stood very erect on his horse, very tall, because it just showed leadership. And at that moment, a bullet is going to clip the back of Gordon's jacket. And Jones is going to see this. And he's going to run up to him and go, "General, you shot." And Gordon says, "No." He goes, "But if I was hunched over like you, that bullet would have hit me in the side. I would be killed. So stop acting like a coward." And so he says that to Jones. So at this point, Lee is riding towards the front now, and Gordon is going to see him, and he's going to ride up to him, and he's going to stop. He's going to grab the bridle on the left of Traveler's face, that little thing next to his face. He's going to grab onto and stop him. Colonel Gibson, he's going to ride up and grab one on the right side. They're going to be holding Traveler's horse, so Lee can't go anywhere, right? And they're going to basically try to pull him back. Now, during this, Lee was not saying a word. He was just sitting with his hat in his hand, looking stoic off into space towards the woods. Just imagine what was going through his mind. One of his soldiers said the general's countenance showed that he had despair and was ready to die rather than see the defeat of his army. So his demeanor and his presence in front was clearly to motivate his men. And this was the third time in the last week that he'd done this. He'd ride up to the front and he would try to show his men. But Gordon, this is gonna be a good conversation with him to Lee now. Gordon's gonna tell Lee, he goes, you must not expose yourself. Your life is too valuable to the army and the Confederacy for you to risk it so wantonly. We are Georgians. We are Virginians. We do not need such encouragement. Colonel Gibson, he's going to sit there and while this is saying, all the men are going to be yelling, no, we don't need it. No, no, no. And because, they don't, what they're trying to tell him is we don't need Lee to be up here to fight hard. We're going to fight hard and we don't need to risk the big man. We don't need to risk his life. Gibson went on. He says, there is not a soldier in this Confederacy that would not gladly lay down his life to save you from harm. And the men are all standing there and they're all yelling, and they're basically saying, we're not going to fight as long as you're here, to take your ball and go home, or we're not going to be fighting. And so they're going to be yelling, and Lee's going to sit there just staring off into the woods. Maybe he was looking for the Rosewoods clown. We don't know. but he's just looking all serious and he's just staring. And Gordon, again, he's starting to get his dander up. Yeah. He's going to say, General Lee, this is no place for you. Go back. We will drive them back. These men are from Virginia and Georgia. They have never failed me, and they will not fail me now. Will you, boys? And of course, the men are going, no, no. And they're all chanting, Lee to the rear, Lee to the rear.
Lee, yeah.
And then Gordon's finally going to release Traveler's bridle. And that staff officer on the other side is going to grab it. And he's going to start pulling him back. You can only imagine what this guy's thinking. He's pulling Robert E. Lee back, and this staff guy. But Lee is going to go, and they're going to pull him back. And Evans' men are going to line up on the right, and Hoffman's guys are going to line up on the left in that traditional, that linear formation.
Yeah.
And they're going to begin to move towards those woods, towards Barlow's guys, the eastern slope of the Mule Shoe. And with Gordon's men now moving, Lee is going to turn to Robert Hunter now. And he's going to try to help him try to ride, get stragglers, go round people up to send to Gordon, he must have looked at Gordon like candy at this point.
I'd have been like, no.
Because he's getting men to go fight with Gordon, not for Ewell or anybody else, right? And while he's riding, and speaking of Ewell, while they're riding around to look for men, Lee is going to come upon the Second Corps commander, Richard Ewell. And when he finds Ewell, now Ewell had just lost Allegheny Johnson. He lost most of that entire division. He was pissed because those 20 artillery pieces got there, but now they're pretty much gone. And at that point, they've all been captured. So, Ewell must have been in a Monday morning merry mood, I imagine, because he was not happy. He was just pissed off, and he was losing his mind. He's screaming at his men. He's hitting them with his sword. He's screaming, trying to rally his men. And Lee's going to find him at this moment while he's losing it. And he's going to ride up to Ewell. He's going to calmly say in that Virginian voice, he's going to say, General Ewell, if you cannot control yourself, how can you control your men?
I've heard that in Martin Sheen's voice.
And I always hear Sheen's voice now.
Yeah,
Thanks
so
for that.
I always hear Martin Sheen's voice. I'd never hear Robert Duvall's.
But you have to think you have to imagine it for Lee at that moment, just comparing and contrasting Gordon's demeanor with Ewell. Now, admittedly, Ewell just saw half his corps destroyed, so it's a little bit of an apples and oranges thing. But with Ewell losing it and Gordon coming leading his men against Barlow, he's you can just see how this whole thing is going now. Now Gordon is going to take his men and they're going to fight and they're going to trade shots for the rest of the battle. But for the most part, where the rubber meets the road now is going to take place on the western slope of this Mule Shoe. Yeah. This is heading towards where Armory Upton had his breakthrough. On the other side, that western slope is when things are going to get really, really crazy.
Yeah, so that's where Rhodes is and Rams are fighting there.
Stephen Rams from North Carolina, he's in Rhodes' division. He's going to be the first one that's going to countercharge. This is going to be the 2nd, the 4th, the 14th, and the 30th North Carolina. They're going to attack that Mule Shoe. Colonel Brian Grimes, he's in the 4th North Carolina. He's Rams' second in command. He's going to write of this part of the assault. He's going to write, the Yankees cut down at least 1/3 of our boys. Notwithstanding this withering fire, our boys made no such halts. other than to pour into the enemy's ranks. The land we charged over was literally covered with the enemy's dead. The field was perfectly blue with them. And so you can just imagine the mud
Yeah.
and the rain. Um, who the person in charge of slowing this counterassault is still David Bell Burney, that 20,000 man division who was bearing down on this end of the Mule Shoe, which is not, like I said, not far from where Emory Upton had his assault
Yeah.
a few days before. Yeah, Confederate Third Corps, guys from Abner Perring's Alabamans, and then William Mahone's division, they're going to go in. And Perrin, upon seeing the lunacy of this assault, because they're running at the meat grinder, he's going to say, I will come out of this fight a live major general or a dead brigadier. That's what he's going to say.
Yes.
Well, guess what? So he's going to be charging with his
Yeah.
sword over his head. Which one do you think he comes back as?
He comes back as the dead brigadier. He ends
He
up
gets
getting shot 7 times in this
he
battle.
gets shot 7 times and killed
Yeah.
instantly. So he ain't going to make it. His men are going to fall back and they're going to form a line and they're going to begin to push on Birney's men. This rebel counterattack is basically creating a stalemate. And that's the goal, is to create a stalemate.
Mhm.
Next to Perrin's guys is going to be Nathaniel Harris's Mississippians, guys from the 12th, 16th, 19th, and 48th Mississippi. And the Mississippi men, they equally talked about the carnage that they saw. One of them wrote, the breastworks were slippery with blood and rain, dead bodies lying underneath and trampled out of sight. So you just can imagine the situation. It's rainy, it's mud. I mean, you think about, you walked on a path in the mud that 100 people have already walked down. Picture thousands now in this dead bodies in the mud, and you're up to your knees in mud and crap.
Yeah, and the mud here is like, just because of the soil and in this area of Virginia, it's such that when it rains a lot, like it has been at Spotsylvania, like the mud becomes really sticky and thick. And it's like one of those ones where like your shoe literally will stay in the mud and it'll stay there, kind of thing. Like,
well, just think of Field of Lost Shoes, right?
Yeah.
It's just think of that situation.
Yeah.
But this is a lot worse. And the Confederates, they're still coming now. After Harris's Mississippians is going to be a 1,300 man South Carolina brigade of Sam McGowan, who was in the great Cadmus Wilcox's division.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to be coming. McGowan's going to join this line, and he's going to help push Birney back because they're looking to redeem themselves, because they got pantsed pretty hard at the Wilderness a couple of days early. This McGowan South Carolinians, right? So if you remember, we haven't done a Wilderness thing, but General Lee Famous said to McGowan, my God, General McGowan, is your splendid brigade of yours, are they running like a flock of geese? He said to McGowan.
Oh.
And so McGowan remembers this. And so he's going to be fighting hard. His men are rushing full in through that knee-deep mud. And McGowan's going to get shot in the arm. It'll be his 4th injury of the war. And if he survives it, but he's going to take a hit too. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning now. That's all it is at this point. All that we've talked about, we're at 9 a.m.
Yeah.
Mary's first beer time, 9 a.m. And these guys have already been fighting for this long. And so coming down on the Union side is now the 6th Corps under Horatio Wright we talked about last time. It's 20,000 guys. They're going to be pushing towards a Mule Shoe now, and they're going to be in that field. Remember we talked about the fields earlier with Barlow?
Yeah.
There was kind of that ravine that they created cover.
Yeah.
That's where these guys are now. And as the Union men begin to converge on this Mule Shoe, they're going to follow kind of a natural slope up, and it's going to lead to kind of like a break in the line right where McGowan's South Carolinians are charging.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna funnel them sort of right towards this area. It's gonna push them towards the same area, and this area where they're gonna meet is where the next 20 plus hours of fighting is gonna go. This area has been called Hell's Half Acre, but it's been more famously called the Bloody Angle. This is where this is going to take place. And just imagine this crowded hellhole with both Union and Confederate troops right on top of each other, fighting hand to hand in the rain, in the mud for 20 straight hours is what this is going to do. firing each other's faces at point blank range. Just picture the dead
Bayonet,
pile.
like using the bayonet, like just
And
like
anything.
clubbing each other with the end of their rifles and all that. Like it's just
These guys were biting each other, scratching each other. I mean,
yeah.
they would. This was as close to literal hell on earth as you will ever find in this very moment.
Yeah, a
They
lot of
said,
guys who fought here, they said they never wanted to see anything like it again. Like it's very horrific fighting.
well, those reports, men said, because we weren't men, we were demons at that
Yeah.
moment. They were fighting like animals, like demons. John Haley of the 17th Maine, he's in Birney's division. He described the scene as a seething, bubbling, roaring hell of hate and murder. That's how he described it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how vivid these people are. The dead bodies were stacked up like cordwood. They were being used as breastworks to protect the live soldiers.
Yeah, that's what they had to do. Like they start using, and it's kind of, in a way, that's what happened at Mary's Heights, right? Like I think it was some of the soldiers, like Chamberlain was one of the ones laying in the field that night that had to like cover himself with dead bodies to protect himself. They're doing this again, but on a larger scale to make basically entrenchments out of them.
Exactly. A Union soldier described a body that was used to protect the others. He said that body was hit 5,000 times. He said his body looked more like a sponge after the battle. That's how many times this guy got hit.
Oh my God.
And just imagine, 9:30 in the morning now, Thursday, the 12th of May, 1864. Okay. The site of this bloody angle is ground zero of Civil War combat. And just have some quotes of other soldiers describing this. A soldier from New Jersey, he wrote, "At every assault and repulse, new bodies fell on the heaps of the slain, and over the filled ditches, the living fought on the corpses of the fallen. The wounded were covered by the killed and expired under piles of their comrades' bodies." So the wounded were getting suffocated and drowned in the mud by the dead bodies on top of them.
Yeah.
A federal soldier saw one of his comrades shot. In a fit of anger, he took his bayonet-tipped musket and threw it like a spear at the Confederate. And a witness to this wrote, "The force which he threw it drove the bayonet entirely through his chest, burying it at least 4 inches of the muzzle of the gun in the breast of the Confederate, who uttered the most unearthly yell I ever heard from human lips as he fell over with the gun still sticking in him."
Oh my
So he basically
gosh.
harpooned the guy
Yeah.
with this, and it just in right through wave after wave of these Union troops go flooding in.
Yeah.
But
One guy said, "God forbid, should I ever gaze on a sight like this ever again."
Now, at the point for Lee, though, Lee had no chance to drive these men back. What Lee wanted to do was create a quagmire, giggity. He wanted to create a stalemate right there.
Yeah.
Because while this was going on, he was going to create a second defensive line in the back. So he was hoping these men were going to create this bottleneck if the Confederates were going to hold them. So he could rally troops, build a second defense line. So when they got through, they had a better defense line. Winfield Scott Hancock, he's still at the Landreau House, right? And he's still trying to fire those 24-pound mortars at the lines, but they're hitting his own men, so he stopped. The fighting was so bad, they said that the trees, it looked like an army of locusts had gotten them. They would
Well,
all
if you look at for instance, the painting that I have on my background, and anything like that, like it looks like a winter scene, right? Because there's no foliage on the trees, but there should be because it's May.
Right.
There's not, because everything has been shot off by artillery, the bullet, like the mini balls, all that. It's all gone because of that. It looks like, kind of like those scenes you see from World War I in the trenches, right?
But the thing is, there's no artillery taking these trees. This is musket fire.
Yeah.
3 total acres of forest are completely destroyed by musket fire at this battle. And this is how the idea. There was one soldier, he said he fired 400 rounds in this battle. 400. There was a 22-inch oak tree right on the Confederate line that was cut down by musket fire and fell in the 4th South Carolina, and only the stump remained. So we'll talk about that later. But amazingly, to this point, there was still 17 more hours to go in this fight, right at this line. And again, Lee's goal wasn't to drive Grant off. It was just to create a stalemate. So while this is all going on, Lee is in the back and he is getting his ribs in a reserve line. We're furiously trying to build a defense line. And as the fighting went through the afternoon and on the evening of May 12th, that defensive line grew stronger and stronger thanks to the men in the Confederacy at the Mule Shoe who were keeping Grant's men from getting at them. So early in the morning, around 2 o'clock in the morning now, this is the 13th now. The Confederates are going to slowly begin to fall back. They're going to, a couple minutes at a time, they're going to sneak back. And after 20 hours of this Mule Shoe, they're gonna start to fall back. Now the Union troops, when they realize what's going on, they're gonna slowly creep forward because they're like, all right, we just had the most vicious battle we've ever been in. We're gonna take it slow here. We know what the hell's in front of us.
Yeah.
They're gonna move cautiously and they're gonna get to the field right where the McCool house is, and they're gonna look further back to the Harrison house. This was Lee's original headquarters. And there they're going to see a new line of breastworks, 100 yards long. And on top of that, what do they see? They see artillery. They see artillery. And they're like, well, we're in for it now. And it's ironic this time, it was Grant who thought Lee was retreating. A couple hours earlier, it was the other way around.
Yeah.
Right?
It was, and like one soldier, when he talked about what was going on, it was Private Carter of the 22nd Massachusetts. He said, I have been lying in a rifle pit for 24 hours during a continued rain and with the severe cold, enemy's bullets, and the deep mud and water, not mentioning the cramped position of my poor body, you may imagine my present position. So this is a guy that was in a rifle pit at the bloody angle for 24 hours. And this is a Union guy. Like that, like when I read that quote, I was like, what? Like,
well, just look at the numbers. At the Mule Shoe alone, 17,000 total casualties, 8,000 rebels, 9,000 Union men, right there at the line. Ambrose Burnside's 9th Corps, they basically didn't do anything. They demonstrated. Gouverneur K. Warren on his 5th Corps, he was over on Laurel Hill on the other side. They tried to do something, but they failed. They really couldn't do anything either. So they said that if you walked across the field for the Mule Shoe, you could step all the way across without touching the ground because of the bodies. That's how many bodies were on this ground.
That's like you said, the one from the 17th Maine, a seething, bubbling, roaring hell of hate and murder.
But Grant, he's undaunted. He still wants to fight. He's going to message Washington, and he's going to tell them that he intends to fight on this line if it takes all summer. That's what he messages Washington. Grant's strategy again was really not to fall back on May 13th. With the rain still falling and this new rebel line still set up. Grant's gonna write. He's gonna continue to write. The enemy is obstinate and seem to have found the last ditch. So Grant, what is he gonna do? He's gonna move his army again, right?
He's gonna reorient his lines. He's gonna shift the center of the action to the east of Spotsylvania, where he thinks the battle can be renewed. So that involves the 5th Corps and the 6th Corps. They're ordered to move behind the 2nd Corps and take positions past the
he wants the rain to slow down. He says the rain's got to stop.
He's like, we can't do this in the rain.
We can let this go. So he's going to do that for a little while. But to your point, he's going to move much of his army to the left. But he's going to on the 17th. He's going to pull Hancock's 2nd Corps back to the right, and he's going to decide again to attack this Mule Shoe again. That's where he's going to go. But he's going to again supported by Wright's 6th Corps and Burnside's 9th Corps. And this point, Lee, I mean, he's been fooled once. He ain't going to get fooled again. He sniffed this move out. So instead, he didn't abandon, what was left when Grant left. When Grant pulled out, he didn't take off. He left his men there this time. And this time, he put artillery there. So just like last time, where he pulled the artillery, when Grant was moving to his right, this time he didn't take the bait. He stayed and he reinforced with artillery. So when they end up coming back, when Hancock did attack again, this time Ewell's artillery is there, and it's going to drive them back pretty easily. Actually, it's going to push them back. Grant's going to realize that maybe it's time to finally pull out of this Mule Shoe, and he kind of does. So on the 19th, he decides to do a different plan. and he's going to try to do what he can because he sees Lee behind these breastworks now, and he knows
Yeah.
he's going to get him out and into the open. So he's going to basically this time he's going to again he's going to use Hancock's Second Corps, who've been God, they need a vacation when this one's over. By the way,
God.
he's going to use Hancock's Second Corps, and he's going to use them basically as bait this time.
Yeah.
So without any support, he's going to send them to a place called the Harris Farm, in which was between Fredericksburg and Richmond. And he hopes that it was like the goat in Jurassic Park with the T-Rex.
Yeah.
He's going to set them there, and he's going to wait and hope Lee comes out and sees okay, it's Hancock, it's a bait. He's going to come out and then he's going to bag him. The problem though is Hancock. When Hancock's getting ready to move out, Lee already drew up plans of his own.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not sitting idling by like me on a Friday night. You know, what Lee does, he orders Ewell to take his Second Corps, his divisions of Robert Rhodes and John Brown Gordon, his 8,000 guys, to move northeast up the Brock Road, kind of like Stonewall's flank attack at Chancellorsville, kind of.
Yeah, it's similar. It's very similar to this.
But not to attack though. That's the difference. He's not doing like Jackson did against Howard to attack. He's taking them to go around and do reconnaissance. He wants to see what the hell's going on. They're going to take a wide route, and they're going to end up themselves at the Harris Farm, which is ironic because that's where Hancock was going to go.
Yeah.
But at the Harris Farm was waiting there was a bunch of Union heavy artillerists who had been recently transferred to the infantry. So they're green. It's not easy being green. Kermit said that. And he's right. So they're going to end up basically. Now, here's the thing. What does Lee tell you? He says, go scout the position.
Yeah.
But do not what?
Do not bring on a general engagement.
Do you realize Lee must have been like, why do I even bother saying this?
He must have been like, wow, is this deja vu? I'm saying it again for the umpteenth time. When did I say this before? And look what happened.
Of course, Ewell says, sure thing, boss. And as soon as he gets there, he brings on a general engagement again. Ewell, without support, is going to hit these green troops anyways. And they're going to fight throughout the day of May 19th. Now, it's not as a large scale like the previous Mule Shoe was, but there's going to be a fight there. But the Federals are going to get support. David Bell Birney's division is going to show up, and also going to get a regiment from the 1st Maryland. So now Ewell is in trouble. And when Lee learns about this attack, he messages Ewell and says, get out of there ASAP, because he knows he's alone and he's all by himself, and he's already lost a ton of guys.
Yeah, so, but he's going to end up losing 900 men anyway, because a lot of them get lost on their way back in the dark.
Right, and that's the problem, is that they're fighting all day on the 19th, and it's going to get dark. And they, for whatever reason, they didn't put breadcrumbs down where they went. They had no idea where they were going. So they're walking back, and 900 guys get bagged. They get lost in the woods.
Yeah.
And so, Lee's move to Harris Farm, which would really end up slowing Hancock, his plan to move Hancock, there by himself.
Yeah, Lee never falls for Grant's trap of attacking Hancock, right?
Yeah, right. And so by the time Grant finally sent Hancock's Second Corps as part of this bait thing he was going to do, it wasn't until late on the 20th and maybe early the 21st, right around there. But Lee didn't fall for it because Lee just kept going. Instead, what does Lee do? He's going to head parallel to his army along that North Anna River is what he's going to do. And so Lee's going to kind of exit the dance floor here. And for the most part, this is going to basically end that 2-week battle.
It kind of just fizzles out really slowly. That's the one thing that was kind of surprising about this battle is I'm like, there should be more, but I get why. I think just my opinion, but I think the weather really exhausted the troops more than what Grant and including Lee it thought that it would, right?
Well, it
really slowed them down because
I didn't want to say it ends with a whimper, but there was no grand Pickett's charge at the end of the battle.
No,
there was that the Harris Farm engagement was kind of it was a light attack for the most part, and Lee basically said, you know what, I'm not going to fall for this. I'm just going to fall back, and he did. So it's the second most bloodiest. It's the second battle, but it's the most bloodiest in the Overland Campaign, and it's a big time battle. I mean, as far as a winner and a loser, it was basically inconclusive. but
I
but it was
mean, the
a
number of casualties, what is it? 32,000
32,000,
casualties.
19,000 for Grant, 18,000 for Lee.
Yeah.
Now, many of these were captured during the first part of the Mule Shoe. They
Yeah.
lost a lot of guys. They lost a lot of generals. Maryland Stewart, they lost. Allegheny Johnson shot. Harry Hayes was shot down in this
Yeah.
one. A lot of McGowan got shot down in this one again. So a lot of this. And the Battle of Spotsylvania, believe it or not, is going to end up the third bloodiest battle in the entire war. When you
Yeah.
look at the carnage, it's after Gettysburg, after Chickamauga, but it's ahead of Antietam, it's ahead of Shiloh as far as total casualties go, and it's just a bloody battle. What's good about Spotsylvania is that it goes on a little bit, and we've been talking about these blood and the mud and death. So maybe we'll kind of go on a happy note here a little bit and try to kind of lighten the mood, I guess, right? You know, and so we talked before about that tree stump, and this is
Yeah.
a great story. It just is.
Yeah.
So we mentioned before, that 22-inch oak tree that was shot down by musket fire. It just left a stump that was riddled with musket balls. The part of the tree that fell was the soldiers must have grabbed that souvenirs. They all took it, but the stump remained there for a little while. Now the stump itself is a cool story. Now, the last time we did this, we didn't mention him tonight, was Nelson Miles, right? He was one of
Mhm.
Barlow's division commanders we talked about in Hancock's Second Corps. He remembered the stump from the battle. And right after the war, he returned to Spotsylvania with some soldiers. They were on their way to Washington. It was right after the 13th Amendment got signed. They were going to go back and they were going to kind of just go and they ended up camping on the battlefield, the old Spotsylvania battlefield. And they went to go find this stump. And he goes to Mule Shoe and he goes and guess what? Ain't there. It's gone. The stump is gone. So he's like, okay, whatever. We looked, it's not here. Someone must have jacked it.
Yeah.
Later that night, Miles is having dinner at a place called the Spotswood Inn with his men. And they're just curious. They start talking to some of the locals. Hey, you never know what happened to that stump that was in Spotsylvania? It's just gone. And of course, no one knew. But right before they're about to leave the restaurants, one of Miles' officers, a guy named John D. Black, he said a waiter came up to them and kind of said, "Hey," psst. He goes, "I know where the stump is." And they're like, "You do?" He goes, "The owner of this hotel has it in one of the outbuildings, locked up in the back."
Wow.
And they're like, "Really?" So Miles and his staff confront the inn owner, and he bumbled and stumbled around more worse on the Philadelphia 76ers in May. And so he ends up opening, he's basically saying, "I don't have it." He goes, "Well, open the door." He says, "No." They actually take an axe and cut the door down. Inside, what do they find? They find the stump. It's actually
Oh.
inside. And they take it and they liberate the stump and they bring it back to Edwin Stanton, who ends up putting it in the War Department. And this thing goes on a world tour. 28 years later, 1893, the Spotsylvania stump is now making an appearance at the World's Fair in
Spotsylvania stump.
Chicago. You know, it's over in it's at the World Fair in Chicago. But then around 1888, a couple years before that, it was transferred to the American History Museum. And if you go on the third floor of that museum, the Smithsonian, you'll see it. It's
Mhm.
there.
It's very
And,
cool.
and it's pretty neat. It's pretty neat if you go there and see it because, and if you go to the battlefield now, there used to be with the stump gone, they put up a
There was a
marker
marker there.
and it had a nice plaque on it, and the plaque walked away. It's gone. But if you go to the Mule Shoe now, you'll see this concrete slab. No one knows, it doesn't say anything, but that's where the tree was. So it's pretty neat. But that Mule Shoe area, it's in you go there now, and you're really taken aback by how peaceful it is. And there are countless bodies still there because
Yeah.
after the war, because what they did was when the soldiers vacated, the Union guys who stayed, instead of burying the bodies, they just poured dirt over the trench.
Yeah.
They already were in the mud, and they just pushed dirt over it. And
Yeah.
so they came to find bodies later on. Some of the southern ones were transferred around the corner to the Spotsylvania Cemetery. The northern ones got sent to Fredericksburg. But there's definitely bodies there, and that's why
Mhm.
you could be when you're walking those grounds, those hallowed grounds there at Spotsylvania. You keep that in mind because if you go, it's you're struck by how peaceful it is and how pretty it is. But again, it's ground zero of Civil War combat, and it just turns
Yeah.
into an absolute disaster.
Yeah, I mean, you read some of the quotes from the men that fought there, and they're just, um, you know, one guy, the soldier from the 110th Ohio, said, in many places, the dead and wounded lay 3 or 4 deep with muskets, cartridge boxes, blankets, and everything pertaining to a soldier's gear, all in the wildest confusion. And that's, the fighting at the bloody angle. And another same soldier said the face and parallel ditches were filled with water and blood, and the dead from the rains were bleached and ghastly. In many cases, the wounded were so tangled and wedged in among the dead as to be utterly unable to extricate themselves without our help. God grant that such another slaughter may never occur. And that's a soldier from the 110th Ohio. And it is definitely, as you said, like it's ground zero for Civil War combat. And today it's a very peaceful place. Some parts of Spotsylvania are kind of have that eerie feeling to them, but overall it's a very kind of peaceful battlefield to visit.
It is, and we could have read dozens more of these soldier
Oh, there's so
quotes in this.
much of this too.
There's
And a lot, and the other thing too that we found was that a lot of the soldiers they talk about the weather. And there was even an article written in, I think it was just a couple years ago, in a Civil War journal about specifically the weather at Spotsylvania, and that played a huge role as well. Like E.P. Alexander, Confederate, he said that we were unconsciously delivered by darkness and the mud and the rain, and the darkness and difficulties triumphed. It helped the Confederates he said it saved them in this battle. Just the weather was, E.P. Alexander said the weather was a factor that saved us in this battle. Had it not been bad weather, things might have been very, very different.
The weather helped and hurt both sides. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
It certainly hurt the Union at the beginning. Sending Sheridan to Yellow Tavern, taking away the cavalry certainly hurt. But it was a battle that people look at it as one of the big boys, but for whatever reason, it seems to fall below the radar with a lot of folks. And it's one that when you really study this, it just shows that sea change we talked about of Grant, of not falling back, of continually hitting Lee. Lee trying to stay between him and Richmond because he still thinks he's trying to take Richmond. He doesn't realize that Grant is looking for his head, and just how vicious it was. By then, this is the third summer of the war. These are battle tested veterans, most of them, and they would just, at this point, the blood and the carnage was adding up. And Spotsylvania, that Mule Shoe of Spotsylvania, is it's one of the most violent places on earth that you will ever go to, and it's a great battlefield to visit. It's very interpreted very, very well. But like we said before, there's not a lot of monuments. There's not a lot of statues. You can just go there and you can hear the story. You can hear it in the wind. Just the battle, and you can just imagine seeing the same things that Barlow saw or Hancock saw or Gordon saw. Emory Upton, you can walk that same trail and you can see what they saw. So I think Spotsylvania is a great study because it's that harbinger of what's to come on this overland campaign. It set the stage, obviously, for North Ann River. It set the stage for Cold Harbor, and obviously the Petersburg siege, that hammer blow one after the other that Grant did, that stuck on Lee, and how tough you had to be to stand in the Mule Shoe and fight. Just look at that stump at the Smithsonian. All those bullets in there, and just imagine what it must have been like. So,
and too, like that's the other thing too. 1864 Civil War. You and I have talked about this. I mean, the entire Civil War is horrific, but 1864 is like, it's such a, I don't know, somehow it gets even more horrific from 1863. And you see that too, not just with Spotsylvania in the Eastern Theater, you see it in the Western Theater too. And we're going to be talking about one of those battles coming up, Pickett's Mills. Very horrific battle on a much smaller scale than Spotsylvania. It's only a day, and in a much smaller area. But, I think 1864 is just it's a different beast when it comes to the fighting in both the Eastern and Western Theater for the Civil War.
It definitely is. It definitely is. So I think it's a good place to drop it here. I think we did it justice as well. So we will do some things. So we have an announcement to make, Mary, and so I'll let you do the honors on this one.
All right. So we are going to be in Gettysburg for the 160th this year, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So on July the 1st, we are partnering with the Gettysburg Foundation and our friend Mark Blanchard, who he's part of the Gettysburg Foundation. On July 1st at 4:30, we are going to be doing a tour of the Spangler Farm, and Mark Blanchard of the Gettysburg Foundation is going to be doing that tour for us. So if you're going to be in Gettysburg on that day, come out to the Spangler Farm at 4:30. You can park your car out there, and Mark will give us a tour of the farm. He's very good at it. He's excellent at it. We've had a tour with him before out there, but that's what we're going to be doing. So that's really awesome that we're able to partner with them for that, because they are Gettysburg Foundation is amazing. They do so much for Gettysburg.
Yeah, the Spangler Farm, if you don't know the area that well, it's the 11th Corps Field Hospital. It's where Lou Armistead died. It's where George Nixon died. And so there's a lot of cool stories, and the place closes at 3. We're going to get to go in later ourselves, just a private little thing. It's free.
The 4:30 is private tour. So
it's not going to cost any money. You can drive in, and so we'll send an invitation out somewhere along the way, probably on social media, to sign up for it. But hopefully you come. And Mark does a great job with the tours, as does everybody else at Gettysburg Foundation. And you guys will get a private tour of one of the cooler places in all of Gettysburg, of course. That'd be the Spangler Farm, the 11th Corps Field Hospital.
Yeah,
so
it is. It's such a for me, it's one of my favorite spots on the battlefield. I mean, I shouldn't say the battlefield, because it's a field hospital, so it's not really on the battlefield, but 11th, the 11th Corps is out there. Carl Schurz was, they know he was there for sure. They don't think Oliver Otis Howard was there at all. But there's a lot of cool stuff to see out there. It's a very humbling place. It's very peaceful, but very eerie. They have a Rosecrans ambulance out there, which was obviously invented by General William Rosecrans, who we've talked about many times before. You can go into the barn out there, into the summer kitchen as well, where Lou Armstead died. It's a really cool
it's a cool place. So watch the social medias for that. Hopefully you can get to do that. So as far as episodes go, Mary, what is coming up for us next after for that?
So our next episode is going to be Pickett's Mills.
Oh,
going back to the Western Theater Atlanta campaign. We're going to be doing that. And then we are going to be having our Facebook Live. If you're listening to this episode, our Facebook Live is going to be Sunday at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, a lot of fun stuff coming for us. So Pickett's Mill will be a good one. We'll get to do that. That'll be a lot of fun too. Let's talk about hazing. Don't hazen me, bro. Just say that again.
We get to talk about Ambrose Bierce.
Ambrose Bierce, of course, Claiborne, Hiram Granberry,
and Howard.
And talking about that Atlanta campaign, and talking about everything that Sherman had to do to try to get past Joseph E. Johnson to Atlanta. So this battle's a really good one. So hopefully you enjoy that. All right, so off we go, Mary. So again, the pleasure was all yours. Any final words from you, Fincheru?
Well, thanks for being an awesome co-host like you always are. And thanks for our listeners. And definitely stay tuned on our social media for the announcement about the Spangler Farm tour in partnership with Gettysburg Foundation. And the tour will be given by our friend Mark Blanchard.
Excellent. Final words from me. If you've been to Spotsylvania battlefield, go check it out. You'll thank me for it. If you haven't been, it's a great place to go.
Amazing place.
All right. So off I go. Have a great weekend, everybody. We look forward to talking to you all on the other side. And of course, go Celtics, Mary.
Yeah.
We'll hope for the best. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye, guys.